All right, let's just dive right into this explainer. We're going to completely dismantle and rebuild everything you thought you knew about your wallet, your savings, and the entire global economy. Because as it turns out, pretty much everything we've been taught about how money actually works, it's completely wrong. So this whole journey actually starts with this fascinating story about an economics student. He spent 6 years studying finance at a university level, only to step out into the real world and realize it completely contradicted his textbooks. So he goes back to his most trusted professor and asks if his crazy, unconventional discoveries about money were actually true. And the professor looks right at him and says, yes, all of it. The professor knew the truth the whole time. But the textbooks? They said something else entirely. And you know what? The confusion around money isn't just an accident. So today, we're going to lay out the entire map of money. Let's kick things off with Section 1, the true nature of money. Okay, so to really understand money, we have to start with this massive paradigm shift. Money is not a physical object. To prove this, let's travel way back to 1903, to this tiny piece of land out in the Pacific Ocean called Yap Island. The people of Yap use these enormous 4-ton limestone discs as their money. Imagine trying to fit literally the weight of an elephant into your wallet. Obviously, you couldn't move them. So when someone bought something, the stone just stayed exactly where it was. The village simply agreed that the stone now belonged to a new family. But here is the absolute kicker. Years prior, one family was moving a stone across the water, a massive storm hit, and the stone sank right to the bottom of the ocean. Nobody could see it, nobody could touch it, but it still kept circulating as money. The village simply agreed it existed, so the family could spend it. The stone was never the point. The agreement was. I mean, even John Maynard Keynes and Milton Friedman, two of the greatest economists ever, who basically disagreed on absolutely everything. They both looked at Yap Island and agreed that these villagers understood money way better than modern economists do. Moving right along to Section 2, debunking the barter myth. So, if money is really just an agreement, where did that agreement even start? We've all heard the story, right? Humans used to barter. You know, you trade your fish for my bread until it got just too complicated, and boom, we invented money. Adam Smith actually guessed this back in 1776, and for 2.5 centuries, textbooks just printed it as absolute fact. But guess what? Cambridge anthropologists actually dug into the historical record and found zero evidence a barter economy ever existed on this planet. Literally none. Over 5,000 years ago in Mesopotamia, we didn't have coins. We had clay tablets that recorded debts. If you helped your neighbor build a roof, he promised to help you with the harvest. Promises came first. The very first coins didn't even show up until 2,700 years later in Lydia. So for thousands of years, civilizations ran on nothing but recorded promises. And what about barter? Well, in places like Russia in the 1990s or Argentina in 2002, barter really only happens as an emergency backup when a money system completely collapses. Barter didn't come before money, it came way after. Think of money kind of like a ruler. A ruler only works if everyone agrees on the measurement, right? Take time, for example. A minute is always 60 seconds. Everywhere, always. It's grounded in nature. Nobody can just wake up tomorrow and decide a minute is now 55 seconds. It is permanently fixed. But compare that to money. Money is supposed to be a reliable, stable measure of value too, but because it's entirely a human agreement, it can be silently changed. It can be manipulated by whoever happens to control it. Which brings us to Section 3, the birth of paper money. For thousands of years, people kept that ruler honest by tying their money to something physical, like gold or silver. You know, something fixed that nobody could easily fake. But eventually, convenience just won out. Back in 11th century China, the Sichuan region used these really heavy iron coins. It was exhausting hauling around kilos of metal just to buy your daily groceries. So some clever merchants started leaving their iron at trusted shops in exchange for lightweight paper receipts. It was so much faster and way safer. But then the government noticed, stepped in, took over the whole operation, and created official paper money called jiaozi. But here's the problem. Wars are really expensive, and printing paper is a whole lot cheaper than digging up metal. So the government just printed more and more and more. Our metaphorical ruler began shrinking. And once the everyday people realized their money was constantly losing value, trust completely collapsed, and they went right back to hauling around those heavy iron coins they had tried so hard to escape in the first place. Okay, let's fast forward to 17th century London, because this is the exact moment modern banking was actually born. Imagine you live back then. The streets are kind of sketchy, so you store your real gold with a local goldsmith just for safekeeping, and he hands you a paper receipt. Pretty soon, people are just trading those paper receipts instead of carrying the gold itself. But then the goldsmith has this dark realization, like 90% of the gold is just sitting completely idle in his vault. Barely anyone ever comes to collect it all at once. So he thinks to himself, wait, what if I lend out paper receipts for gold I don't actually even have and charge interest on it? So he prints fake receipts that look perfectly identical to the real ones. And boom, he starts collecting real hard interest on fake money while the citizens who think their gold is sitting safely locked away are carrying all of the hidden risk. I mean, talk about audacity, right? Now, you'd probably think that when this massive goldsmith fraud was finally exposed, there would be absolute outrage, maybe some major reforms. But nope. Instead, they actually made it official. King William III was absolutely desperate to fund his wars, so in 1694, he created the Bank of England. He literally gave these merchants an official license to issue unbacked paper money out of thin air, backed by nothing but the king's promise. The fraud wasn't shut down, it was crowned. And almost every country on earth ended up copying it, which is exactly why the Bank of England is known today as the mother of all central banks. All right, Section 4, the end of gold. So even with central banks basically running the show, the world still tried to keep money somewhat honest for a while. In 1944, at the Bretton Woods Agreement, the Western world tied all their currency to the US dollar. And then they tied the US dollar to physical gold at a fixed $35 an ounce. But America started spending really heavily on wars and massive domestic programs. They were quietly printing way more dollars than they actually had gold to back up. And other countries, they noticed. The math just wasn't mathing anymore, and they started demanding their physical gold back. The US vaults were emptying out fast. So, on a Sunday evening in August 1971, President Richard Nixon goes on national television and completely detaches the dollar from gold. The last anchor just vanished. Overnight, all the money in the world became just paper, backed by absolutely nothing but trust. And the fallout from that decision, it's honestly staggering. $8. If you were sitting on your couch watching that broadcast in 1971 with a crisp $100 bill in your pocket, that exact same bill today buys you only about $8 worth of goods. 92% of his purchasing power just evaporated into thin air, even though the number printed on the note stayed exactly the same. Section 5. How banks create money. Okay, so where is all this new money actually coming from that's constantly watering down the value of yours? Well, the textbooks will tell you that banks take your deposits, keep a little bit in reserve, and then lend the rest out to other customers. But that is entirely false. Today, 97% of all money is strictly digital, and it's not created by the government, and it's not even created by the central bank. It is created entirely by private banks, right on computer screens. Let's actually walk through how this happens in the real world. First, you walk into a bank and you sign a $10,000 loan contract. At that exact moment, the bank records your promise to repay them as an asset on their books. Then they simply type $10,000 into your account, just out of thin air. They didn't take that money from someone else's savings account. Your physical signature on that loan document literally conjured brand new digital money into existence. They just typed some numbers on a screen, but they get to collect real hard-earned interest from you in return. And that leads us to Section 6, the secret purpose of inflation. Okay, here is the fatal flaw in this entire setup. When you borrow that $10,000, you actually owe back $11,000 with interest, right? But where does that extra $1,000 even come from? It was never created in the first place. The only way you can possibly find the money to pay your interest is if someone else goes to the bank and takes out a brand new loan. So the system literally requires a never-ending infinite loop of new debt just to keep from collapsing completely. And because the money supply keeps expanding way faster than actual goods and services, your money buys less every single day. Every major central bank actually targets 2% inflation per year. They politely call this price stability. But compounding a 2% loss over a lifetime, that cuts the value of your life savings in half every 35 years. The ruler is being deliberately and silently shortened year after year. So you gotta ask yourself, if someone designed a system that basically guaranteed your money would constantly lose value over time, who exactly did they design it for? Who is actually benefiting from inflation? Well, the answer is the borrowers. Think about it. If you borrow money today when it's strong and you pay it back decades later when inflation has made it weak, your debt quietly shrinks in real value. And who are the absolute biggest borrowers on the planet? Governments, period. Every single one of them. They hold debt so massively large that they could never realistically be paid back through honest taxation. But through inflation, those debts are quietly melted away, constantly shrinking over decades. So as we wrap up this explainer, it all boils down to this crazy realization. The saver pays so the borrower can benefit. This continuous drain on your purchasing power isn't some weird flaw in the financial system. It's the very foundation of the system itself. And it leaves us with one final, deeply important question to chew on. If the global economy requires your hard-earned savings to constantly shrink just so massive government debts can quietly vanish, what is your money actually worth? Think about that the next time you check the balance in your banking app. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next one.